we would love to know who's joining us, where you're coming from. I'm Allison. I'll be the moderator for this panel. I am joining from McHenry County College outside of Chicago. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Seeing some fellow Midwesterners in the group. I'm sharing my screen so I can't see the time, apparently. But is everybody in who was in the waiting room? Tanya?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then. So welcome to our panel here, Experimenting with Peer Mentoring, Models for Professional Development Among Staff and Administrators, presented by Paula, Michelle, Emily, and Beth. Welcome to all our presenters. You've already, I think, all know how to use the chat, but just in case you don't, it's down there at the bottom, obviously. And then you can pull it up to see who's chatting. I will be keeping an eye on that for questions throughout the presentation. Just a couple notes, if you haven't seen before, we're recording chat. If you are having any technical difficulties, including seeing our wonderful ASL interpreter, Antonio, keep yourself on mute unless you're a presenter. And if you have questions anytime before the Q&A, just post them on in the comments, or in the chat, sorry. Questions or comments, put them in the chat. So with that out of the way, I will turn it over to our wonderful, wonderful presenters.
All right, looks like I'm going first. So, hey, I'm Emily. I'm here to present the first part of our presentation, which my part is called Piloting a Mentor Program, Experiences and Lessons. I'm a graduate student at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. Next slide. Yep. I will begin by giving a bit of background about the mentoring program, which laid the foundation for my interest and experience within mentor program implementation, development, and administration. At my home institution, the University of Minnesota, I was working with Dr. Leanne Kasman-Broik and Dr. Angel Dewan in the summer of 2018 as a research assistant for the department's Technical Communication Advisory Board, or TCAB. The three of us came together in a meeting early in the school year to brainstorm an idea for a mentoring program which bridged together students working in academia and industry professionals. So mainly those working in technical communication adjacent positions, but also some alumni of the Writing Studies graduate program as well. Towards the end of fall semester of 2018, we launched the program with a handful of mentor-mentee pairings with the goal of keeping pairings together for at least one semester. So why a mentoring program? Quoting Broik, Dewan, and Gressbrink, forthcoming, academia exists within a bubble, and real-world workplaces are difficult to recreate in an academic setting without students taking on intern or externships or working roles. In the context of the advisory board, this was the closest thing that students had in the department could get to the real-world hands-on experience while remaining in academia. Now, why an industry or academia combined? Why not a mentoring program just within the department or on campus? Doctors Broik and Dewan and I went for industry and academia combined because, based on conversations, the mentor program with industry experts was an experience that students couldn't get in a course to date at the U of M. And we hypothesized an experience like this could strengthen academic and professional experiences before entering the workforce or continuing into higher education. As a quick note, the TCAB advisory board itself is still going strong. The mentoring program itself, as of 2021, is still operational and has paired mentors and mentees together with successful outcomes for undergraduate and graduate students, as well as industry and academia professionals. The program status is TBD for this upcoming fall semester. I would guess it's still going to happen if interest is in place, which would mark its 3rd year. Next, I'll briefly explain how the mentoring program works. In the pairing process, when I worked with the program, we began with 2 separate paths. Mentors on the advisory board, as well as some external mentors with connections to the program, expressed interest in serving as mentors. They provided a list of skills based on a prescribed list of common competencies and terms found in a TPC program. Then we put out a call to students, undergrad and graduate, to join the program. We had them list interests, the same as mentors, and write a paragraph about why they wanted to join. Based on this qualitative and quantitative data, we made pairs based on best matches. This was usually based on industry expertise or interests. The program itself had a kickoff meeting where mentors and mentees met in person and spent the session getting to know each other, discussing goals for mentorship, and gathering contact information using a guided worksheet. Activities during the program after that point were contingent on mentor-mentee decisions. We recommended a few meetings, I believe 2 to 4, but they could meet more often or less frequently as the relationship allowed. They could occur at the mentor's workplace, on Zoom or Google Hangouts, or at a neutral location. The goals and outcomes of this program were to narrow the gap between academia and industry as informed by a community of practice theory and framework. For those interested in theory and research, a good resource for this year is Dewan and Tom, 2018, and Wenger, 1998, and Klein and Barker, 2012. We also wanted the program to build relationships that enhance professional development for all parties, help the student develop a personal learning network, PLN, and articulate clear goals for professional development. Finally, let's reflect a little bit on the experience. I genuinely love mentorship and mentoring programs, and perhaps coordinating things a little too much. So for me, the opportunity to help pilot a program was something I'm passionate about, like mentoring, was a dream. That said, from a logistics perspective, a lot more than I anticipated went into it. Having a blank slate and many slate pencils was a dream, yes, but it was a lot. I'm forever grateful to Doctors Broik and Dewan, and remain grateful for those who continue to support mentor programs and program launches. It's not an easy feat, and it's very contextual no matter where you go. Returning to the U of M, from a planning and preparation stance, we had to prepare the program from a 2-fold approach. Not only did we have to take into consideration the needs and wants of the students, but the mentors as well. If the goal was to have a mutually beneficial project, then all needs across the board had to be considered and met as broadly as possible. Not the easiest feat when you have a lot of stakeholders in the game, but definitely worth it. And research considerations also were in place from day one. As a research assistant at the time, I knew I wanted to do some tangible research with the subject. The process of getting IRB approval, documenting, interviewing, and writing up the study was time consuming as well, but again, definitely worth it. Finally, we know some things will go inevitably wrong. So midway through the program, people will fall off the face of the earth. There will be complaints, meetings will get rescheduled and scheduled, but things will also go really well. And that's a big reward of mentorship and scholarship related to it. And overall, things did go well in the pilot study. Some things that specifically went well were the overall experience. Mentors and mentees had an overwhelmingly positive response to the program, including satisfaction with the pairs and goal achievement. Students felt the program was successful in bridging the gap between industry and academia as well, with mentees specifically mentioning a deeper understanding of industry insights and procedures. And some things that did not work were, generally speaking, dissatisfaction with pairings, not being able to meet as often, or confusion with the goals. These are not inherently complaints with the structure of the program itself, but more of an insight into user context. It would have been interesting in hindsight to know exactly what went wrong besides, I didn't like my mentor, why specifically, or what would have worked better. So what does this mean? What does all this information mean going forward? A big thing here is the idea of community, the gap between industry and academia and the duration of community, or the longevity of the program. The program itself was successful and continues to be, which is good. I'm curious to see how things go as we enter the second or third year of the pandemic too. How does moving this online impact program outcomes and thoughts? And what can we learn about community, user experiences, and goal setting that we can apply to other mentorship work and mentoring programs? So that covers my part of the presentation and some thoughts and lessons that I picked up in my work piloting and working with mentor programs. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect with me.
Michelle, if you're talking, yep, you might be muted.
Oh my gosh, such a rookie mistake. I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now?
No worries. Yeah, we can hear you.
So thanks so much. So I wanted to share with you all my experience developing a collaborative professional development program that we used with our tutoring staff at my previous institution. And that institution itself was huge. Our writing center was nowhere near as large as was needed to serve that institution, but it was maybe relatively large as well. As I hear other people presenting over the last couple of days, I'm realizing it's not as large as I thought it was. But we had a tutoring staff of around 35 undergraduate and graduate students. And at the time that we worked there, we also had 5 graduate students, myself included, who were employed as assistant coordinators or ACs. Broadly, our job was to act as liaisons between the coordinator and the tutoring staff, and more specifically, we each sort of oversaw different zones of administrative work to help the center run smoothly. So for example, someone was really assigned to scheduling and maintaining staff schedules, whereas someone else was working with coordinating our center's writing groups. So when I was hired as an assistant coordinator around 2014, my job was to oversee training and professional development. And I realize I'm not doing a great job of doing both of these roles. Okay. Previously, we had weekly paid staff meetings, and they were really just check-ins on logistical problems or a chance for us to give updates on anything going on. But we didn't provide any regular ongoing PD after our pre-semester training wrapped up. So in my first year as an AC, I spent hours each week planning hands-on large and small group activities, inviting university partners, and even asking individual tutoring staff to present in their areas of expertise for our staff. I wanted the staff meetings that we had to prompt reflection, connection, and engagement among our staff. And at the end of the year, when we surveyed our staff, we found that while the meetings were educational, our staff said that they felt a little bit too much like taking an extra class, which wasn't quite our goal. That same year, I attended a workshop at ECWCA, the Eastern Central Writing Center Association Conference, with my colleague, Sarah Franson Wilder, who I also just want to, in general, credit with piloting the mentorship programs. She was also an AC at the time, a graduate student. In the workshop that we took, the facilitators talked about a program in which they paired each new consultant with a returning or veteran consultant. Building off of this idea, Sarah and I decided that rather than doing one-on-one pairings, which for various reasons were logistically difficult for our staff, we decided to create small group mentoring opportunities for our staff that would fill in for our paid PD. The concept behind these mentorship groups that we created was to emphasize the non-hierarchical ideals of the Writing Center, knowing that these were ideals that we could approach but not necessarily quite meet. Of course, I'm realizing that, there we go. Okay. Of course, we did have an explicit hierarchical reporting structure that was intentional. So we had our administration and we had our tutoring staff. And we were also somewhat aware that our center had an implicit social hierarchy that we weren't so keen on, where, for example, an undergraduate tutor reported feeling some imposter syndrome around graduate tutors, et cetera. And so our goal was to move towards something more like the Knights of the Round Table cartoon that you see on this slide, where each member felt welcome and valued, even if our director was sort of our King Arthur at the time. As a peer-to-peer writing center, we really did believe in the power of peer mentoring, and we wanted to formally sanction a space for that sharing to happen internally, right, for our staff as well. Actually, this was an important goal for us to compensate for our physical space because in particular at the time, we didn't have a very accessible break room where consultants could talk confidentially in between their sessions. So mentorship groups could be a safe space for consultants to reflect on their sessions and talk about those details. We also wanted consultants to be able to decide what their own PD would look like. To plan meaningful all staff meetings, I had put so much work into identifying consultants' professional needs and planning activities that would meet those needs, but mentorship groups could give consultants room to reflect on and explore their own concerns much more organically than all that planning I'd been doing. So together, all of these goals meant that we wanted each Writing Center staff member to feel like an equal and active partner in their own learning and professional growth. To create the mentorship groups, we assigned usually around 6 staff members to a group. It was fewer during the summer because we had a smaller staff. And each group had one administrative facilitator who was either an AC or the director himself. Sarah and I did try to create some balance in each group. We would especially mix students of different academic levels, grad or undergrad. And we also took into account things that we knew about our staff, like experience that they had had in the Writing Center, trying to balance gender if we could a little bit more and other factors. But most of our group assignments still came down to scheduling, who was available at what time, as I'm sure others here know how difficult it is to schedule your staff. During the regular school year, mentorship groups met 3 weeks out of the month. And in the 4th week of that month, we brought everyone together for an all staff meeting so we didn't lose out on our large group fellowship. So essentially, mentorship groups would meet weekly, except for once a month when we'd come together as a large group. At most of those all staff meetings, a mentorship group or 2 would present or facilitate, which gave each mentorship group a common goal to work towards during their sessions together. So I'll share with you now the lessons learned from this experience. While I was an assistant coordinator, I learned a lot from facilitating mentorship groups. Our groups changed each semester, so I facilitated a different group each time. And although I should mention about these lessons learned that a more formal evaluation is needed, some of my data or access to the data has been lost while transitioning to new institutions. But from what I saw and from what I noted on our surveying of students, first, students did tell us that they felt more welcome in mentorship groups than they had in large all staff meetings, especially undergraduate students, L2 or international students, or just students who were a little quieter and felt less comfortable speaking up in a large group, even with a lot of small group activities that we had invited. In fact, Sarah and an advanced undergraduate tutor at the time, Caitlin Aberl, co-presented on this mentorship group outcome at CWPA, the Council of Writing Program Administrators Conference. And I actually really love that even from the co-authoring of this presentation, we see us approaching that ideal where a peer tutor and a graduate administrator are collaborating together on scholarship. That was really neat to see. And I also witnessed students take initiative in these groups to contribute to our center. For example, one group that I was in drafted and proposed a new observation protocol after surveying other mentorship groups. That was something that they noted was a problem within our center. And so they sort of took this initiative to develop a survey and create a protocol that we then put into effect. In professional development evaluations, it was neat to see students say positive things like that they valued the opportunity to help shape the center, that they felt like collaborators with the administrative team, and that they regularly got to use us, the admin team, as resources, whether to ask questions or to have a direct line of reporting and solving problems in the center. As the PDAC, I can also say that mentorship groups freed up planning time massively. All of that time that I had spent planning meetings and drafting meeting minutes to distribute afterwards was suddenly time that I could use to support other activities in the center. On the other hand, I would like to share some problems or disappointments that I encountered in facilitating mentorship groups. And I will note that these are especially based upon my own experiences and perception. They are not coming out of formal evaluation or objective data, which is going to skew things potentially a bit. But first, as an administrator with no scheduled tutoring hours myself, my role was only admin. My regular work didn't look like that of my group mates. So in one group, for example, we had decided to do weekly highs and lows, and I always struggled to balance transparency with discretion. I wanted them to know what work I was doing as an admin, but whereas a consultant could use the group to troubleshoot problems they'd had with a client or say, something didn't quite go well in my session this week, I always had to be really careful to avoid showing lows that were often really the crux of my job, which was navigating internal interpersonal challenges among our large administration and staff. So basically, if we were having problems with a consultant, or if there were things kind of going on behind the scenes that were interpersonal problems, it was something that I wanted to sort of shield the group from, but I also didn't want to be unable to sort of share in that peer mentoring. It was a little awkward, honestly, my own role in the group, when I felt like I was trying to maybe accomplish something different than the others. And also, like, I didn't want to be the administrator sort of overseeing them. I wanted them to be able to have that organic relationship we were after. I will say, though, in that particular group that I'm thinking of, I really valued learning more about my group mates' troubles and triumphs, and just talking tutoring each week was something that I really missed as a person who wasn't doing tutoring myself. And on the whole, that group turned out to be a really wonderful mix of graduate and undergraduate tutors, and they continue to meet and socialize informally just because they so enjoyed our time together. And we actually saw some really neat mentoring relationships emerge from that one. Some of the other groups, however, that I facilitated did struggle with common ground as well, but in other ways. Particularly when the motivation or buy-in was lopsided. Students who were less interested in growing in their writing center practice would regularly miss group meetings or disengage from their group mates. These weren't necessarily new PD problems for us. The same people who were not showing up to our large group meetings were people who tended to not show up to the small group meetings. But those problems did seem more prominent in a small group format, especially if a returning or very experienced consultant was modeling very disengaged behavior for newer consultants. And that could really disrupt the energetic, inquisitive, and collaborative dynamic that we were after in these smaller groups. Each term, some groups just gelled better than others. I do think that these issues that I'm bringing up weren't a result of the mentorship group model. Rather, they pointed to some of the underlying areas that I think our center for as a whole could improve. So I do think that we probably should have been assigning admin tutoring hours. I think that would have been important for our work as liaisons. I also think that there's more that we could do to reduce burnout among our staff, or increase engagement, or even being potentially more selective in hiring. And I've wondered still, though, if we could, in the same way that the PD work that I was doing was alleviated by forming those mentorship groups to begin with, if maybe we could have given students even more control over who was in their group and when they met. Like, maybe if we were grouping them more by their interests and concerns and sort of areas that they wanted to grow in, and then they chose the time that they were going to regularly meet, maybe that could increase the buy-in and consistency across the groups. They either bought in and they were awesome, or they maybe weren't. Overall, I think that there are so many options for designing group mentoring and reflecting upon those choices. And that's part of why I'm so excited to be working with the OWC Mentoring Committee, and to sort of hear these different experiences from Emily and Paula as well today, and those different approaches that we've taken. So with that, I will turn it over to Paula.
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you to everyone who's here today, including our fabulous interpreters. And thanks to the other members of the panel as well. I'm the Assistant Director of the Yale College Writing Center, which means I support the teaching of writing specifically for Yale's undergraduate students. I have to begin my talk by thanking Michelle again, not just for her great presentation, but she is the person who helped me imagine and talk through ideas for the mentor program that we're fostering this year in our center. And so I owe her a debt for that. First, I'll provide some background for what led to our center piloting this mentoring program this fall. I began my current position in February, earlier this year. And while I wanted to make sure I didn't come in and start changing too many, if any, aspects of the center right away, I did immediately begin to notice ways I could bring my own administrative philosophy to the center. These ideas largely fell under two objectives. One, create a greater sense of community or a belonging among our tutors, or writing partners, as we call them. And two, recruit and hire a staff of writing partners that more closely represented the diversity of our college's student body as a whole. While the majority of our staff identify as white, according to the Yale Daily News, more than 50% of non-international Yale College students admitted in 2019 self-identified as a race or ethnicity other than white. For me, this signaled that while hiring a more diverse staff would require a proactive and mindful effort, it was a goal very much within our reach. However, the former objective of creating a greater sense of community in the center would prove more challenging, yet all the more important due to bringing in a more diverse incoming staff. I will never forget how I felt I had found my people when I first began working in a writing center as a sophomore at my undergrad institution. While I know not everyone will identify as a writing center person for the rest of their career, I do strive to create a sense of community and belonging in whatever center I help direct. So if you're only going to be a writing center person for one semester, hopefully you still feel very involved and valued in that area. Especially as diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts spread across many campuses, it's important to remember that a sense of belonging can be one of the greatest predictors of student success. Fostering a sense of belonging seemed an exceptional challenge at first due to our services being completely online, thanks to the continuing pandemic in spring 2021. And a second challenge was our staff size. When I first realized the size of our staff, I was almost incredulous that any sense of community could be realized. Despite being a comparatively small school overall with about 4,500 undergraduates, our center is fortunate enough to employ an average of over 100 partners annually. This year, we rehired 60 returning tutors and hired 33 new undergraduate tutors and hired 20 new graduate tutors for a total of 113 writing partners. So as Michelle mentioned, yeah, you see such a range of numbers of staff here at the conference. Certainly nothing like the close-knit group of tutors I became a part of when I was working as an undergrad would be possible. This is where Michelle and the rest of this panel comes into play. While I was serving on OWCA's mentoring and scholarship committee, I was introduced to the idea of group mentoring rather than a one-to-one peer mentoring model. And its clear alignment with the theories and goals of Writing Center work, a plan slowly kind of appeared to me for how we could create a greater sense of community in our center. As I developed my plan, I have repeatedly referred to the Inclusive Excellence Framework, or IEF, which is used by various educational and government organizations to examine how change can be implemented in a manner that honors diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice goals. Scholarship gives us 6 keys to success with IEF that I have repeatedly returned to while imagining and implementing this new mentor program. According to an Inclusive Excellence Framework, any project should be co-created so that anyone who will potentially benefit or be involved with the program has a role in developing that program. Second, programs should be high impact and maximize the benefit for everyone involved. What did the current writing partners feel about their experience working in the center became a guiding question for me. Aligning myself with IEF principles, I wanted to ensure any initiatives I implemented took cues from the partners themselves. So during the spring of this year, I developed and ran 4 focus group sessions. All writing partners were invited to sign up for a focus group or provide answers to the same questions asked in the focus group via an anonymous survey. Here, I share a list of questions asked during these focus groups. I provided opportunities to tell me what excited them about working in the center and to provide feedback on challenges and opportunities for growth in terms of the center's overall work and the hiring and training processes specifically. Through asking these questions, I aim to honor the keys of co-creation and high impact as I developed potential programming for the upcoming academic year. During focus groups, I was pleasantly surprised to hear staff meetings were a highlight for some writing partners. That's something I hope to continue. They described how time with other writing partners and the Writing Center administrators provided an intellectually stimulating environment to ask questions and discuss concerns. Some noted how this atmosphere was a welcome change from meetings they experienced in other departments or organizations on campus. Two other findings, though, reified my belief that a mentor program would be a welcome addition to the center. Multiple partners expressed disappointment that they rarely, if ever, received individualized feedback after initial training. Others voiced a desire for more professional development opportunities, including more focused and intensive training. Based on these findings, I proposed a mission for our Writing Partner Mentor program to promote a greater sense of belonging among writing partners and to offer writing partners more opportunities for professional development. Thus, my objective became mission-driven, which is one of those key aspects of IEF. With this mission in mind, I drafted the expectations provided to our inaugural group of mentors. These expectations include facilitating small groups during training and serving as an observer upon request for any WPs in their assigned pod. And those pods include both new and returning tutors. I should note, though, that in the spirit of co-creation and high impact practices, I did leave expectations purposefully vague in places. For example, I don't define what it means to actively check in on other WPs, as I wanted to discuss what this might look like with our inaugural group of mentors who each brought their own ideas about how they might best work with their pod of mentees. Interested writing partners were asked to, people interested in serving as mentors were asked to write brief responses to the questions, why do you want to be a writing partner mentor? And how would you build a feeling of trust and community with your assigned mentees? To select our mentors, we used a rubric that evaluated applicants on a scale ranging from unsatisfactory to excellent in 5 categories. First, we evaluated their combined responses to our 2 questions in those 5 categories: demonstration of an enthusiasm for the position, demonstration of a commitment to or willingness to contribute to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging goals, demonstration of emotional intelligence in the form of self-awareness, empathy, motivation, and interpersonal communication skills, something we hope all of our writing partners have, offering of concrete and compelling examples of ideas for working as a mentor, and finally, demonstration of a reflective tutoring and/or mentoring philosophy and practice. In addition to the points earned based on their written application, we also awarded WPs who had worked for us for 3 to 6 term an extra point, and WPs who had worked for us 7 or more terms, 2 points. Finally, if the WP had completed our optional month-long ESL training, we gave them another 3 points. We received 15 applications, and as I reviewed them, I was struck by how many of our graduate tutors cited being a part of mentor programs at their undergrad institution as a reason for being interested in our program. One student's response specifically referred to a group mentoring format. At my undergraduate university's Writing Center, there was a similar mentorship program with head fellows who were responsible for groups of new and veteran writing partners. As a new writing partner, I found this mentor and the group overall to be critical for establishing my comfort and confidence in the writing conference. After a year or 2 under my belt, the space that my head fellow offered me a place to renew my strategies and tools for working with students in the writing partner. That was a quote from one of our graduate writing partner mentors, Isabel Lorenzi. One of our undergraduate writing partners, Ryan Bronston, wrote in his application, "I'd love to serve as a writing partner mentor because I'm in love with the concept. I wish it had been around when I was just starting out. As a recently hired sophomore, the thought of helping fellow Yale students was exciting, but it was also incredibly daunting, and it lent itself to imposter syndrome-esque things. Who am I to help this fellow student with their paper? Why should they listen to what I have to say? These feelings subsided with experience, but I think a mentor would have alleviated them from the get-go. Such testimony strengthened my belief that group peer mentoring program would be a great asset for our students. So using the rubric you see here, my director and I chose our 12 inaugural writing partner mentors. So we're still not even halfway through with the fall 2021 semester. So for now, I can only report on the success we've seen so far. We've only had our first meeting with our mentors, and they have been meeting with our new hires over the last couple of weeks and helping us in the training. I want to talk a little bit about how I ran that first meeting with our writing partner mentors and how I hope to continue facilitating those meetings with those mentors. I began the meeting with a key from IEF, transparency, by sharing the full story of how we arrived at a mentor program as I have here today. Then I chose to use the format of a restorative justice circle for our conversation, believing this offered one way to remain equity focused. I view circle work as equity focused because while it invites everyone to speak, no one is required to speak, and participants are reminded to make space and take space. In other words, those who commonly are the most talkative or overly represented in conversations are asked to self-monitor, while those who find it harder to speak up are asked to bravely share more than they might normally would. Our sharing started with a check-in question that allows the group to acknowledge the full humanity of each person and what they bring to the circle. Our mentors, our director and I also shared about a time when we felt or did not feel a sense of belonging in a learning environment. As we left the meeting, we were all tasked with reflecting on what we heard in the circle and how we could use our and our others' experiences to encourage a sense of belonging among our partners. Going forward, it is my hope and belief that the sense of belonging and care experienced during our first mentors meeting will be felt by our incoming hires. My spirits were buoyed when a few hours after our first meeting, I received an email from a mentor saying, "I'm really enjoying all that you're bringing to our meetings, especially with the restorative justice circle meeting styles and an emphasis on belonging. I'm already feeling a huge difference in the community of writing partners here, and it is somewhat striking to me given that we haven't even met in person yet." This feedback suggests I am on the right track to overcoming the challenge of virtual building, and I am excited to continue experimenting with our mentors. However, I know that creating an inclusive and welcoming environment will necessitate consistent reflection and openness to feedback. I and our mentors will continue prioritizing a program that is co-created, high impact, mission-driven, equity-focused, and transparent. One component in closing, one component of IEF I am unsure how to leverage in this mentoring experiment is making the program measurable, as belonging is a difficult concept it seems to measure. For now, I plan to use assessment opportunities such as surveys and focus groups again, as well as rates of return among writing partners we hired this year. I hope that my esteemed colleagues on this panel and those of you kind enough to join us today will provide some constructive feedback on what I've presented and ideas for how we might measure the success of mentorship as we move forward together. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Paula. And hi, everyone. My name is Beth Nasachowski. I'm the Associate Director at the Writing Center at Walden University, and I'm also the co-chair of our Mentoring and Resources Committee within OWCA and the founding secretary. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, Michelle. Thank you. I'm going to start by talking about the origins of mentoring in OWCA, which started in early 2020 with the pandemic when OWCA was still the online writing center community. When the pandemic began and so many universities were forced to move their services online, we recognized that there was a unique opportunity to connect our community and support many writing centers who were having to rethink their services overnight. So over 2020 and 2021, we had 21 mentors on our roster, and we matched with 15 mentees. So we really tried to approach this with a mentor matching approach. The program itself was simply a matching program. So an individual would request a mentor, we'd match them the best we could, and then the mentor mentee pair would connect how and when they preferred. When the Online Writing Center community transitioned into a formal organization and we developed a committee to work on mentoring, we took this opportunity to analyze our goals for mentoring and re-envision the mentoring program along with all the panelists here today, which I'm very grateful for the collaboration with all of these wonderful, wonderful Writing Center administrators, workers, people, folks. We'll go with that. This included asking ourselves the following questions. So how can we create a more robust learning experience for mentees? How can we balance the time requirements a mentor-mentee relationship requires? And how can we incorporate tutoring pedagogy into a mentoring program? You can go to the next one, Michelle. Thank you. To begin to answer these questions, we first looked at the literature focusing on Writing Center or RetComp literature about mentoring relationships. As we looked at this literature, we found the importance of mentoring to help with career advancement, professional identification, and personal development. The 4C statement of professional guidance for mentoring graduate students in particular emphasized how mentoring can be a force for social change within institutions as well. This literature underscored the importance of mentoring, but it also discussed the importance of mentoring for Writing Center professionals due to the isolated nature of Writing Center positions at institutions. So we knew that mentoring would be important for our organization. When we looked at the literature on the format of mentoring, our initial thought that mentoring pairs can be limiting was supported. While mentoring pairs can and do result in fruitful and robust mentoring relationships, they can also reinforce hierarchical relationships. And when they don't work well, they don't work at all. Thus, our group looked into group mentoring approaches, which the literature reported can disrupt hierarchies and can result in many benefits, like reduced feelings of isolation, increasing confidence, supporting career advancement, and facilitating a better understanding of higher education, culture, and politics. Go on the next one. Wonderful. Based on this literature and our own experience with mentoring, the committee developed a revised mentoring program for OWCA, one that relies on a group mentoring approach. Our mission is to promote innovation, connection, reflection, and growth among participants and in the Writing Center field as a whole. These mentoring groups will be responsive to individual mentee needs and help mentees develop online writing, tutoring, pedagogy, and practices. We are excited, so excited, thrilled that applications for our first cohort of 2022, which would start in January, are currently open. Our first cohort of mentoring groups will begin in January, running through June, so 6 months, with the second cohort starting in July and running through December. Each cohort will have a kickoff meeting, monthly synchronous meetings, and a wrap-up meeting, with each group identifying any other modes or frequency of communication. Note that applications are open for group mentoring participants as well as group facilitators. So when you register or sign up to be a part of the group mentoring program, you can also indicate if you'd like to be a group facilitator, which requires or doesn't require, we're offering additional training and support for those facilitators. That includes training, resources, and support. So while you won't be expected to be in charge of the group facilitators will provide administrative and facilitation support in the groups to provide some structure. I think the last thing I just wanted to note is I do have the link for the group mentoring program on OWCA, and I'm going to put that in the chat so that if anyone is interested in learning more, please feel free to take a look. It is open and free for all OWCA members. So I also appreciate the opportunity to provide a shameless plug. With that, I can hand it back. I'm not sure if how we were doing Q&A.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes for the Q&A. So if folks have any questions for our panelists, you can unmute, speak up, or drop them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that.
I have a question for
Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. The first person that talked about the group mentoring, I think it was Michelle. I was wondering with the groups, what type of guidelines or expectations or goals were the mentor groups provided, or how much were they left to just a sense of that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. They got to decide their own structure or formatting. Some of them wanted a little bit more of like a routine structure, and some of them just wanted to come in and talk about what they wanted to talk about. They met weekly for an hour. It was paid and in lieu of a staff meeting, so they were expected to show up. They were assigned, I can't remember actually now if they were assigned or if they signed up for, but an all staff meeting that they'd present at, and they got to decide, they set the agenda for that. So some of them, for example, presented on how to use specific tutoring tools. Others presented, my group that made the observer protocol presented on how we'd move forward with that. I remember we had one group present on how to use the online corpus for like working with ESL students and how that could be something that you could use within your session. So whatever it was that they were sort of taking interest in, and they decided, how will we meet this goal before November's all staff meeting or something like that. And there was something else I was thinking about. Oh, and then the other thing that we did have from each group was usually someone from the group, and it wasn't necessarily the facilitator, was responsible for sending like some meeting notes so that we could kind of keep everyone in the loop. And I will say in my groups, I was happy that that was no longer me, but just because it ended up being a lot of work to sort of send out all staff meeting notes. But so we were trying to sort of keep people in the loop. But otherwise, what actually happened in the groups, I mean, that might even sound more structured than it really felt like. We would meet, we had a scheduled room that we would go to, that we had sort of scheduled to spend our time in that semester. We'd meet at the time, and we would check in and sort of say, okay, how's your week going? And sometimes someone would say, oh, that sounds like a really cool resource. Would you mind presenting on that next week? Can you tell me more? Like there was one really experienced tutor that had some really specific sentence level resources. And we said, hey, do you mind us doing that next time? We had certain facilitators that said, my group's really looking for resources on X, Y, or Z. I'm going to bring in an article for them to read. So we wanted them to set it and them to ask for what they needed. And with certain groups, like I mentioned, that worked really, really well. And with others, it was a little bit harder to say, okay, but we need to take on some kind of work or some kind of goal. And so it took more prompting on the part of the facilitator to invite them to set their own agenda. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions?
Emily, I wondered if you could, if you had any examples of folks from industry that people were partnered with, and if you had suggestions or ideas for how to create those connections. Were they mostly relying on alum of the program to serve as mentors, or how did you gain people from the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. So some of the folks that we had on the advisory board were in technical communications positions in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So one of the big industries in the area is healthcare communications. So like Medtronic, we had a couple of folks who worked at Medtronic that came in. They were either alumni of the University of Minnesota's technical writing program, or they had connections to the U of M either through publishing, or maybe they have taught adjunct before. They came through that way, and they had been asked to serve on the advisory board as connections to industry, and they came in to serve in a mentorship capacity. So usually they had an alumni connection of some sort, but sometimes it was either a publishing or a professional connection to the U of M as well. What was your second question again? Sorry.
No, yeah, I asked for examples, which you gave, and how you make those connections. That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Do other panelists have questions for each other? Or I don't know if anyone in the audience has done their own kind of peer mentorship or experienced that in the past. We've got a couple minutes left, so. It's also the last panel of the day, I know, and it's a Friday, so.
I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, Paula. I just was curious how it's going, because I know you talked a little bit about it, but the last time that we were talking was before the beginning of the semester. And I know that your groups, even just from hearing you talk about it in this presentation, seem like better organized or better trained than the groups that I'm like, this circle that you're talking about, I'm like, tell me more, that's really interesting. So I was just curious how that's going, and when do those groups begin? Are you training for the spring semester?
So we're on a, I'm getting used to our timeline, but we do our hiring of new consultants in September. And so our new hires, we're doing training in September. So our mentors helped us with activities during training, and they were like an essential part of that, and allowing us to get a more, especially in Zoom, like we're able to get us connections and to each new writing partner. Since it's hard to like meet individually with 100 folks, 100 plus folks. And then, yeah, I don't think there's definitely already things that I want to think about next term. I don't know that they're well organized compared to yours at all. Like, I love this idea about having them present at staff meetings, etc. But as I said, I kind of am trying to invent or like co-create the program with our mentors this year, and let them experiment. And because we really trust the people that we've hired as mentors. And so we're going to have our second mentor meeting on the 18th and hear from them about how it's going, what's working, what they're hearing from new hires about what we could better be doing. So yeah, hopefully so far so good, no complaints.
Great. I'm reading the comments in the chat, which are very interesting and very true. Would anybody care to respond to the stuff in the chat? Or I can share my last few slides, but.
I like, Kim, what you say about you're only one administrator. That is one thing that, as putting this presentation together, that I'm thinking about is how, Michelle talked about being in her own group. It's really the mentors that are kind of my group. And I had a similar experience, Michelle, when I'm like, I want to be vulnerable and real with them, but there's also like a line of what I can share with them in terms of people's interpersonal conflicts that we're facing. But yeah, so I think that the group mentoring is one way, whereas if you're an administrator working on your own, you can work closely with a small group of consultants. And then if they're each working with their own group, the idea is that hopefully that goodwill, that sense of community, the ethos that you're trying to create kind of spreads out to those groups.
Yeah, I absolutely think, Kim, that ours did not really take much regular maintenance. Ours, the difficult part about it was regular scheduling, which happened, that like blitz of scheduling pre-semester when you're like, how do I fit all these puzzle pieces together? And it was just another layer of that. But in terms of our regular stuff, I just sort of showed up and would chat with the consultants, and we did the presenting at all staff meetings really just to give people a purpose a little bit more, and to have something to do at the large staff meetings. Usually the last large staff meeting of the semester was just a party. And I think the first one was like a kickoff. And so, but it gave us a little bit more things to do there. But I think that, I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what Paula finds. I think it could be more effective to have tutors appointed as facilitators than to have administrators appointed as facilitators, just because that role does look really different. And then having those facilitators of the group sort of take on that more of like a lead mentor. I was not intended as the group facilitator to be a lead mentor. Like, it was really just like I took a role to make sure that everyone got paid for showing up. And I think I reserved our space. Maybe, I don't even know if we reserved it or if we just sort of camped out in a little different spot that we could group each term. But it really, like, the groups, when they went best, they were ones that really everyone sort of contributed and just sort of checked in, and we said, okay, how do we want to do this? And then from there, the students did it all. And it took, I mean, like, hours and hours each week that I had been planning professional development. I was like, it was almost disappointing to be like, oh man, I put all that work into this in the previous year, and like, students can do this on their own, and they were happy to. Again, with some caveats of students who were disengaged.
Awesome. Well, we're just about out of time. So thank you all so much. Thank you again to our presenters. If you would like to leave your contact information in the chat, if people have follow-up questions, go ahead and do that. Thank you also to our ASL interpreters, Shannon and Antonio. Let's see, what else? This is our last session, so it's a Friday. Thank you all for attending. The recordings will be posted soon. And just as a reminder, you can get involved with OWCA if you are interested and would like to. So thank you, everyone.